Welcome to our treaty walk at Douglas Park Hill, Regina. Let's take time to acknowledge that Douglas Park Hill is located on Treaty 4 territory. This is situated on the territories of the Nihilwak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and home of the Métis Mischief Nation. Douglas Park Hill is also known as Wascana Hill. It's a man made hill along the Wascana Lake, and almost all of Regina can be seen from the top.
As we know, Wascana Lake is a man-made lake, being drained, deepened, widened, and refilled twice since its inception. The man-made portion of the lake resides on Treaty 4 land and has significant connections to Math and Indigenous peoples of Canada. For instance, when the lake was drained to be deepened and widened for the second time, the depth of the lake was approximately 1.5 meters. This is 35% shallower than it was when it was drained the first time. With this information, we can deduce that the original depth after the first drain was roughly 4.29 meters, which translates to about 14 feet deep. We can obtain that solution by setting up the equation 0.35x equals 1.5. 0.35 is our percentage placed in a decimal value, and 1.5 is the current depth. X is the final depth, and to solve for it, we need to divide by our decimal to isolate the value, giving us the equation 1.5 over 0.35 equals x. Once solved, we get our solution of 4.29 meters, or about 14 feet deep. If you haven't realized yet, I just taught you that through spoken word, which is how Indigenous education was traditionally taught. Place-based, verbally taught education is crucial to creating a safe environment for students from an Indigenous background. The process of deepening and widening Wascana Lake is a complicated one, much like creating treaties. The goal is to create an equitable relationship with the people that we are creating a treaty alongside. This was not evident in the creation of Canadian treaties, leaving the relationship between settlers and the Indigenous population to be fragile. Just as draining the lake is the first step of enlarging the lake, the first step of mending the relationship damaged through treaties is reconciliation. However, over time, we have not made the effort to reconcile the relationship damaged. A quote from Val referencing the challenge that First Nations people face about seeking the government to make amends. Right now, hundreds of settlements are being negotiated across the country to end various claims by First Nations over stolen lands, broken promises, damages, and so on. Claims that sometimes go back hundreds of years and have been pursued doggedly by those First Nations to no avail. We must try, such as the effort to enlarge Wascana, to mend the relationships broken through treaties.
Many enjoy Wascana Hill as the location welcomes all to participate and interact with the environment. Here we can connect with kinships as understood by Wakatoan and deepen our connection to treaty relationships and understandings by focusing on and recognizing the relatives we share that form the habitat and environment of Wascana Hill. From a social studies perspective, we can view our relatives, the sun, wind, water, plants, and animals, and develop a recognition of our responsibility to these relatives. Unit 3 of Social Studies 20 has a focus on understanding the knowledge that a habitat is the place where plant and animal species naturally live, and if a habitat changes significantly, the species depending upon that habitat for resources may not survive. Practicing the Mio Wechidowin and developing good relationships with our environment is integral to supporting the habitats within these environments. Understanding this, we can practice developing our connection here at Wascana Hill by taking a moment to reflect on the question, should nature such as this location be seen as something like a machine or a resource which can be manipulated as humankind sees fit? Or should it be seen as an organic whole with the capacity to react to the way it is treated? Connecting to this question allows us to practice our dialectical thinking while also practicing Wewachedowin and Miowachedowin, of living reciprocally while making good relationships. We can also answer the posed question through acknowledging Wetaskiwin, which means living together on this land and being one with this land. Through this, we recognize our responsibility as treaty people and the impact that Canadian treaties and our relationships to treaties could have globally. As our communities in Canada develop connections to Wetaskiwin and Mascassawin and our relation to treaties, Canada could be viewed as a positive influence for other regions to develop these connections with their environments and habitats. Understanding our relationships to treaty and life around us supports our environment, which is essential to life.
From the Douglas Park Hill, you can see many of Regina's prominent historical landmarks. Whether it is looking across Wascana Lake to see the First Nations University campus, looking north to see Dewdney Avenue, or looking west to see the Legislative Building, Douglas Park Hill's view gives you an opportunity to look backwards in time through the lens of geography and culture. Unlike other planned cities in Canada that incorporated the benefits of a lush or diversified terrain, the treeless plains of Saskatchewan only offered a small creek to build around. Despite not being a prime location, the then Lieutenant General Edgar Dewdney insisted that the Pile of Bones location be developed for the territorial seat of government in Saskatchewan. In an inadvertent act of Mio Wichigotwin, Pile of Bones was an adopted name that originated from the Cree name for the place, which was Uskunu Ka'us-Taki. This expansion south continued on Treaty 4 land, connecting the greater Canadian regions via the Canadian Pacific Railway. Relationships with the First Nations and Métis were damaged when the city of Regina decided to play a significant role in the detention, trial, and hanging of Louis Riel. The trial of Louis Riel coincides with the region building the legislative building and joining the Canadian Federation, marking the transition to a primarily Euro-Anglo population.
For this part of the treaty walk, we are in the Habitat Conservation Area. The Habitat Conservation Area is located just south of Wascana Hill and provides valuable habitats for various mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, insects, and plants. The HCA website mentioned this area was formerly owned by a number of private landowners but was amalgamated into the HCA in 1970s. Native and non-native grasses, shrubs, trees, and herbs can be found here. This site can serve as a good region to look for plants and traditional herbs which hold a significance in traditional and indigenous approaches to healthcare. Elder Jimmy Mew states, when the Creator first put Indian on his land, he gave him everything that he needed, land to live on. He gave them trees, animals, and from there to make his own clothing and to make their own shelters and to eat. And he also put there good medicines that would heal all kind of illnesses, and those medicines were true, and they were all good medicines. The medicine wheel or circle of life represents a holistic view of well-being, which symbolizes the interconnection of all life, the various cycles of nature, and how life represents a circular journey. The medicine wheel teaching include all the knowledge and the teaching that humans need to live. Elder Peter Vascat says, there was a lot of teachings, lifelong teachings that were passed from generation to generation. So we had our own doctors, our own medicine people, our own leaders, and those leaders had the teachings. The four plants which hold sacred values include sweetgrass, tobacco, cedar, and sage, representing the four directions and aspects of health. The Wascana Center website mentions that they are beginning to replant native grasses and forbs in the HCA in order to return it to native prairie community. By respecting the history of the land, they are setting examples of Vaha Vichitwin and Meo Vichitwin.
Wascana Lake is part of a larger watershed known as the Lake Winnipeg watershed. This watershed supplies water to about 7 million people who are living on the land and stretches across treaty territories 1 through 7. The watershed binds us all together in the spirit of Wawa-Kitwin, or living reciprocity. The watershed here is shared by everyone. When one hurts our more than human can, it damages the water we drink and the water we use to grow food. Neither does the water follow arbitrary borders people create. Our watershed crosses reserve, provincial, and even national boundaries. No matter what borders divide us, we are in a circle of reciprocity with those who are living on the land. Let's take a moment to think about who relies on our shared water. The lake can also help to remind us of the lasting nature of our treaty relations. It's elder known in some childhood stated about treaties till the sun passes by and the Saskatchewan River continues to flow and the grass grows. Those were the sacred promises. Those were the sacred words that they were using. For generations, the indigenous peoples living on the land relied on the native moss and muskeg as a natural way of filtering water to drink. These native species remain an important part of our global interrelations, as moss and muskeg store a large amount of carbon in the global carbon cycle. In fact, we can often forget how many of the plants in our local area are actually invasive species brought by Europeans. For example, something as simple as the species of grass that most of us use in our lawn and at local parks is called Kentucky bluegrass and is native to much of Europe and Asia. This is why the Native Plains Restoration Site just across the lake and the conservation site right here where native plants are free to grow is so important to preserving the balance of the ecosystem. Let's take a moment as we close to consider how we can give back to the land in the spirit of Wawa-Kitwin.